Hello, everyone. It's Charlene, and I'm Charlene Lee here, and I'm going to be talking today about overcoming fear and failure. So I'm going to give a few minutes for people to come in here. And as you're coming in, I would love for you to be able to share where you're coming from and also share a spectacular failure that you are open to talking about. Because I think we're going to be talking a lot about today about how we approach failure. And I thought a good way for us to break the ice, so to speak, is for us to share when things haven't gone well. So I just want to make sure that you all can hear me and see me. So please say hello, introduce yourselves, and tell me where you're coming from and and also share a particular failure that you're going to that you've had in the past. Because what we're going to be talking about today is how do you take risks? How do you overcome the fear of failure that you may have? And I find the reason I'm so passionate about this topic is that the biggest reason why we don't take risks, why we don't take chances, is because we're afraid of failing. So what happens if something goes wrong? What if I look ridiculous, right? What if people lose faith in me? And this keeps us from achieving our goals or even starting out. And so when I talk to organizations and when I talk to leaders about, look, so what's keeping you back from being innovative, from being disruptive? The one thing that keeps coming up over and over and over again is, well, I'm afraid I'm going to fail. And all the horrible things that could come from that. I could lose my job. I could make my company look bad. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about how difficult it is to actually deal with this sense of failure. And I'll talk about it myself too as well. So I want to say hello to people. Hello, Kaya from Brazil. Hello, as well as Sami from Nigeria. And Anil from India. Metlos from South Africa. Another person from Malele from South Africa too as well. Thank you so much for joining. We have George coming from Florida. And Jatish also from India. So this is a fantastic group that we have here so far today. Again, please share where you're coming from. We'd love to say hello. And also share what you fear. What's the failure that you fear? What is it that's going through your mind right now? And what is it that you have issues with? A couple other people were coming in from. I'm Zamina from Chile. Hello. Federico from Colombia. Welcome. Surenda from San Jose, right around from here. And Gareth, thanks again for joining from London. And Siva, thank you so much for joining from Syria. So this is fantastic. Let me get started and talk a little bit about what is it about failure that is so difficult for people. And the problem is that failure is something we'll deal with. It's the fear of failure that becomes an issue. And especially when your motivation to avoid failure exceeds the motivation to succeed. And so you may see this great big shiny goal that you want to achieve, but over here, you're afraid of all the things that could go wrong if you don't achieve it. So you don't get started. And that is just such a shame because there's so much people could accomplish, I think, if we could set aside this fear of failure. So I want to talk a little about where this sense of failure comes from. And there are two from my research that I found. One is there's an underlying shame and embarrassment that comes attached with failure. So there's this idea that it confirms in many ways the things that we're afraid of, that we're not smart enough, we're not loved enough, we're not capable enough to do whatever it is. And we feel shame. We feel that it's confirming this unworthiness that we see in ourselves. And we despair and give up on our dreams. And that's the power of shame. I know I feel this all the time. It's like, what if I go out there and make a fool of myself? I do these live streams all the time and things go wrong, as some of you who have tuned in on them. Things go horribly wrong. I don't have the sound on. My video is terrible. My bandwidth is awful. And I have to shut it down. And at first I was really worried about how that would make me look. But then I realized that the benefit of connecting with you, of being present and sharing these ideas and hoping that they would help you would overcome my fear of that shame and embarrassment. The other underlying reason why we fear failure is because it's fear of rejection. What happens if we don't fit in? What happens if we're no longer accepted? It is such a social and human aspect of us that if we fail, we might get kicked out. And that is just the scariest thing, to no longer belong to a group that we want to be in. So this is this primal fear of being socially excluded, of being ostracized, that keeps us, again, from taking these risks, from moving to a space because we fear. So the impact of this is a couple things. We don't try new things. We don't get into new projects. We self-sabotage. We procrastinate. We have low self-confidence and self-esteem. And again, there's this whole idea of trying to be perfect. So I thought I'd share, in particular, one thing that I thought was very helpful. This was from a list of 10 various signs. I just narrowed it down to the top 5. And there are things like, you may be having a fear of failure if you're worried about what other people think about you, or disappointing people, especially those people who you respect and whose opinions you value. You may be feeling afraid of failure because it makes you worry about how smart or capable you are. You may tend to tell people beforehand, before you try something, well, I don't know how well this is going to go. I'm going to sandbag my expectations. I'm going to really try to keep it down. Or the thing that I find myself doing because of my fear of failure, I'm oftentimes distracted. I'm like, oh, I've got to go organize my spice drawer over here. Or I'll procrastinate to the very last minute and not do something until I have to. So that deadline is a forcing function for me. Because if I take it on now, my fear of failure is going to keep me from accomplishing my goals. I'm driven by perfectionism. I'm driven by that fear of shame and embarrassment. And so that oftentimes keeps me from adopting the things I want to do. So I want to take a minute and see who else is here. Pause for a second and see what you all think about some of these ideas. Do you have a sense of failure? What are you afraid of? And by all means, ask any questions that you may have. I do want to say hello to a couple other people. You have Tina from Sweden. Thank you for joining today. Magda from Warsaw in Poland. Azim from Dubai. We have Azaz from Riyadh. Corey from UK. Vinayak from India. And we also have somebody joining us from Egypt. So thank you so much for joining. Again, continue to share where you're coming from. And I would love to, again, just understand what are some of your challenges when it comes to dealing with failure. So one of the key issues around dealing with failure then is, how do you actually go about and start to address this? So we've talked a little bit about what the challenges are of failure, but let's talk a little bit about how do you actually overcome them. And one of the biggest issues around overcoming failure is that when you are trying to do it, it's how you think about failure. So sometimes we may thinking, let me just get over here to my slides if I can get it to go. And I'm having some problems with my mouse. Where is my mouse? This is a failure as it is. I can't show my slides because I can't find my mouse. Here we go. Here we go. Now you can see it. So one of the issues around overcoming failure is, instead of thinking about it as a failure, like, oh, how horrible this has happened, think about it as redefining that failure as a discrepancy between what you were trying to achieve and then also what you actually achieved. And that discrepancy then, instead of thinking as a black and white that you failed or you succeeded, there's a gap. And then you can study that gap. You can learn from that gap and you can recalibrate. And that is the key area that I find with so many innovators, people who seem to just take risks all the time. I ask them, how do you think about this? And it is not that they don't fear failure. They know what could potentially go wrong, but they have a very realistic view of it. It's not all or nothing. They go, this is my aspiration. This is where I got to. What's the gap? And they look at it very pragmatically and say, what went wrong? And they ask questions. What did I learn from seeing this gap? How can I grow? And what would I do differently next time? And then how do I do things differently so I can again try to achieve that goal? So one of the biggest reasons why I find people don't do this is because they see that it's either all or nothing. And I'm going to go for that job. But if I can't get that job, I'm going to be really embarrassed for having tried. So therefore, I won't even try. Versus saying, I'm going to go for that job. I'm going to do the best that I can to apply for that, answer the questions that I have. And if I don't get it, then how come I didn't get that? What can I learn from this? So the next time I apply for a job, a similar job, I'll do better at it. And one of the reasons why this is so powerful again is that when you have an approach versus an avoidance goals, it makes you think much more positively about what are the benefits of even attempting versus the cost of inaction. I like to say to friends and family when they're talking like, oh, I don't want to do that because I want to apply for this. I don't want to go and give a speech because it's going to feel really awful. But what are the benefits if you actually go through with this? Think about those positive aspects versus the cost. If you don't do anything, you just stay where you are. And oftentimes, if we don't look at those costs and benefits, the real cost of inaction versus the cost of failure, we never get off the steps to be able to go do that. And then what I love this last part is making a fear setting list. And this is coming from Tim Ferriss. He makes a list. He has a great TED talk. He makes a list of all the things you're afraid of, and then what you feel will happen if you do it. And so what are the things that could happen to you if this doesn't work out the way you want? And so I'll just give a quick example. I think one of the things I've always loved doing was jumping off of high places, but I was always afraid to jump out of an airplane because, you could die from jumping out of an airplane. And finally did it this past fall, went skydiving, was just so excited because I thought about the safety. I thought about all the reasons why I would want to do this, and actually went and did it. So here's a picture of me actually jumping out of an airplane. So I think for some of us, this would be like the epitome of like, why on earth would you ever do this? But for me, it was very fun and exciting because I was able to overcome that fear and come back to being able to really think about that great sense of freedom and flying literally and being able to do that instead. So one of the key things that I really want to emphasize is that one of the best ways to be able to overcome this fear of failure is to take that first step. And I want to just share this one comment from Jates, which is a great example of how to overcome this. But fear of failure is not meeting the expectations of my bosses, my clients' expectations, or even my own expectations. And this causes me to lose fear. And I think that's a great example, Jates. So thank you for sharing that. One of the ways to overcome that is, well, what are the first little steps that you can take to address that? If the idea is not meeting the expectations of your bosses, maybe it's having a conversation about what those expectations are. Are they at the level that you think they are or not? I mean, having those conversations is to really address those questions that you have. I love this, Kalish, always question your fears. That's a great way to be putting it, because then you are talking about, were those fears real or not? And I don't care what everybody says, how irrational my fears are. I feel them. I feel them in my gut. I feel them in my soul. My palms are sweating because of it. Those fears are real. I never doubt that they are real. But I think what Kalish is saying is you have to question them and say, are they real or not? So thinking about the worst case scenarios is one way to think about them, but also think about the origins of it. Is it that shame again, that embarrassment? Am I going to be worthy? Will I meet expectations? And unless you take that first step to say, well, what are those expectations? How do I start questioning it? It's going to be really hard to start addressing them. Kailash also just has this other thing that he adds, and I love this: focus on what you can control. And I find that the most important thing that you can control is how you react to things, how you feel about things. So, and TR also says, Thank you for sharing this, that I acknowledge having missed a lot because of fear and avoidance modes. I'm right there with you because I think about all the things I could be doing with, for example, my group Quantum Networks, or I could be doing right now, even in a state of this pandemic and the shutdowns, that I could be doing so much more, but I'm afraid of extending myself out there. So I'm right there with you. This is something that all of us deal with. And I think that the difficult part is trying to figure out, how do I move past this? I know that for me, one of the things that I'm going to be doing is dealing with this whole procrastination of putting things in my calendar, just taking small little steps. And sometimes I just blow right through them still. I just completely ignore that thing. Like, I am not ready to deal with that. But I would say 1 of 4 times I'm actually going to go and do it, focus on it, I set a timer, make myself focus on it for 30 minutes. And then I feel so much better about it. And that has this is that way of overcoming, again, that fear of failure, fear of engaging, because of the potential shame and embarrassment of not meeting expectations that are out there. So just a couple more hellos. Hello to Norma in Angola, Dr. Mohammed from Bangladesh, Rangel from Mozambique, Sylvester from Kenya, Mohammed from UAE. We have Rashon coming from Brooklyn, a little bit closer in, and Guillermo coming from Cali, Colombia. Great to see you again. And Al Prosper, I love the name, from Tanzania. We have we have Ahmed from Sudan. And let's see, there's a couple more comments here. I think that's it for now. Again, I want to encourage you to take a look at the things that you have going on in life. I love this idea of identifying the things that you're afraid of, the things that you're afraid of around failing in particular, and really identify how they're holding you back, and take that first step by, again, just questioning whether that fear, where it's coming from, and understanding how you can take the first step towards doing that. And the next time you take on something and you don't quite succeed, and this could be anything in your life, it could be little things like you didn't eat well or exercise enough. Look at the discrepancy. Again, I love this idea of looking at discrepancies and figure out how you can close the gap at your next attempt. A couple last comments here. I love, Randall, thank you for sharing that. In your case, it feels like your family and your kids really intensify the feeling of fear and taking risks. I can hear that. I can see that, because especially if it means your livelihood, your job, or doing things that could put yourself in a risky situation, but especially your job, you're not going to stick your neck out and take on something if you fear your job is at risk. And for the leaders who are out there, realize that especially during these times when things are so uncertain, this is the time when we need our team members, our employees, our colleagues to be taking on more risk, not less risk, so that we can move our businesses forward. But they're not going to do this if they're feeling their jobs are at risk. So one of the most important things to do as a leader is to remove that shame, that sense of embarrassment, the fear that you could lose your job, because no one's going to move out of that. One of the ways I think about it is, if you want people to take more risks, you have to define a safe playing field. You need to define literally the court that they are going to play on. Otherwise, they won't know that they can move out of that one safety zone. And if you're sitting there thinking, I have some ideas, I would love to take these risks, how do I ask my leader, my boss, my manager to take on these risks? Again, ask them, how far can we go? How much tolerance for risk will you take? Can we actually afford? And have those agreements ahead of time. Because that way, you know that even if it works, fantastic. But if it doesn't work, you will be safe. So I encourage you, Randall, to try to understand what are those parameters, that area of playing that you can go into, that risk-taking field, and really define that for yourself. Because it sounds like you want to take risks, but that concern for your family and your kids is holding you back. Someone is sharing here, I love this. I think a great part of fear comes from others, like parents and friends. When you have failure, most of the time they blame you. This is, okay, I'm not going to go into the psychology of families, but we are the product of our parents. And having raised two kids, I apologize to them all the time for any ways that I may have just completely messed up the way they think about the world. But one of the things I think for us to do is to recognize, again, when this is coming from some past experience, some past failure, a traumatic experience that you had, where somebody was blaming you, and to understand that may be influencing it today, to put, again, into perspective what that experience was, and to separate that from what is happening today. Again, having grown up in a traditional Asian household, there was a very strong expectation of being in school, doing well in school, and in my case, becoming a doctor. And when I decided not to continue with my pre-med, I really was afraid to go do this because the expectations from my family was that you were going to become a doctor. It's a surefire way to make a living, especially as a woman, Asian of color in America. It was a safe, secure way to make a living. And instead, I said, I'm going to go into business where there were no role models of people who look like me. And so I was really afraid that I was going to fail. I was going to disappoint my parents, let my family down. And I went to the worst case scenario to reassure my parents that in the end, I will be able to make a living. I will always have a roof over my head and food on my table. I am too much of an achiever and a hard worker. And if nothing else, I figured I would be the world's most amazing executive assistant and will have a job, even if I couldn't succeed in being in business and leadership. And so knowing that, that I could do this, I had the blessing of my parents, and they fully supported once their fear of my failure was addressed with that worst case scenario. So I feel that, again, to Elle's point here, that some fear is also part of the upbringing that we have. So totally agree. We are the parts that we were made from our upbringing, from the friends that we have, from the places that we work. And again, I just encourage you to think about the ways that you can find that connection between what you want to achieve and be able to address very clearly these fears that you have. I want to close out by thank you again for joining this broadcast, and I just wish you the best on your journey, because this is not for the faint-hearted. It takes tremendous courage on your part to overcome these fears. These are deep-seated fears. Whatever those fears may be, speaking up, giving a speech, asking for a promotion, going out there and advocating for something you believe is right. But if you think about the benefits of that, and also the cost of not pursuing this, of staying where you are, then hopefully that begins to help you shape and understand and put that fear in perspective against all the things you really want to achieve. Again, I wish you all the best on your journey to overcome these fears, to take risks, and I wish you all the best today. And thank you again for joining this broadcast. Have a great day.